of everyone else's time who's joined us. You've just been alerted that we are recording today's webinar. For those who aren't able to make it in person and ask questions today, it's recorded, and you'll be able to access it because I know there's tons of great information you'll be gleaning today if you want to revisit. We're also encouraging you to share with your colleagues who couldn't join today or other people in positions where they might benefit from this webinar, which is one of many in a series we're doing. I'm very appreciative to be able to join you today from Treaty 6 territory in the lands of the Nehiyawak, Anishinaabe, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and homeland of the Métis people. My name is Alex Rogalski. I am a program consultant here at Sask Arts, and it is our pleasure in partnership with Creative Saskatchewan to be embarking on this year-long professional development program we've entitled Sask Shift with our partners at Arts Action Research. This has been an ongoing project we started last fall, and it has been incredibly beneficial in so many levels and facets of the program, including this series of webinars that we're hosting. We've had two previously in the end of 2021, and now this one, March 2nd, and there will be a few more coming up each month until June. So stay tuned, we'll be announcing those and sharing those dates and times with you. Today, you're all joining us. I'm so grateful that you're here because we are welcoming Nello McDaniel, who will be leading the seminar today on leading arts organizations. Nello is the founder of Arts Action Research and brings with him decades of experience of helping organizations navigate the constantly shifting ecosystem that you find yourselves in moving forward with your arts organization and bringing the passion and dedication you have, especially here in Saskatchewan, to provide wonderful resources and opportunities for all the residents who live here. And Sask Arts, as a partner with Creative Saskatchewan, we're just thrilled that we can offer this professional development to so many people and look forward to seeing the benefits of it come about in the days to come, and months and years to come. So with that said, I just have another couple points. Like I said, we are recording today's session. We also are making it accessible through live transcription. You'll see at the top of your screen, there is an otter.ai. And by clicking on that, you will see a live transcription, should that be of some assistance to you today. I think those are the main things to point out. Like I said, thank you for joining us. Please stay tuned for the upcoming seminars that we'll be having. I wish I should have, I had the date earlier in my brain and now it's not on my screen. So I'll throw it in the chat shortly so you can see what the upcoming next date is for the webinars. But I'm so glad you joined us today, and I'm going to turn things over to Nello now.
Great, thank you, Alex. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Great seeing you all. Those of you I can see, and I'll just say, please feel free to turn your cameras on or off. I think staying mute until you might have a question or comment will be helpful. But it's terrific being here, and I want to just start off by making mention that I'm coming to you, zooming to you today from Brooklyn, New York. And Brooklyn, New York resides on the homeland of the Lenape-Hoking people, which is part of the Algonquin Nation and the Lenape Confederacy. And so, as I said earlier, I'm really sorry this can't be in person, face to face. A lot of things are beginning to change, and maybe it won't be long before that'll be possible. I certainly hope that it will be. Since there's a really large number here, and I was thinking perhaps trying to go around and do introductions, but with the numbers and also the time, I'm going to forego that. But Alex, I would like to ask. Is there a list of all the participants that will be circulated to everyone after this? Or I lost Alex?
No, I'm still here. No, we haven't planned on that just because it's an open opportunity for anyone to take part. So we haven't considered gathering the names of people. I'm not sure what mechanism we might use to do that. But yeah, because it's just an open seminar without any registration requirement, anyone has the option to opt in to take part. But by all means, if there's an interest in gathering the names for some sort of group list, we can find a way to facilitate that. But I'm not sure how. I would lean on Carmel to maybe think of some way to do that. I'm not sure exactly at the moment.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. Well, let me turn just quickly to my associate, Ann Dunning, who is popping in to say hello. Ann, say hello.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you all here. Great to have you in this session and learning from Nello about arts boards. I know you're going to get a lot out of it, and enjoy, and feel free to follow up and ask questions as you need to from either Nello or myself.
Great. Thank you, Ann. Yes, I would, and I certainly I underscore that. And I do want to get into the material and talk to you about boards, and something that I have spent a lot of my time and work with over the years. As Alex mentioned, I'm the founder and director of Arts Action Research, and I've been here, and I started this about 30 years ago. So I've been here for a good while, and have seen many iterations of boards and board changes over this period of time, and we've had a lot of experience working with boards, and I'm going to share with you a good deal of what we have learned in this time, and I hope you'll find a good amount to help inform some of the things that you're trying to do with your organizations. So I am going to see if I can pull up this. Pull up my slides here. And I'm going to get this rearranged here so I can, okay. And so I'm using the slides for two reasons. One, to make sure I cover all the material that I want to today, and also to make sure that I don't go digressing too much as I'm wont to do. Wait a minute, I'm gonna get this going right here. All right, so there are three topics that I'm going to cover with you today. The first is a little bit of commentary about old versus new, and in this some discussion about some of the theories and myths that have been received about boards over the years. And I want to touch on this and not do a lot on it, but I do want to touch on it because I think that there are a lot of really terrific arts professionals and equally, terrific board leaders and board members who find themselves really frustrated with trying to make the board work and trying to make this board model come alive and work for them. And when that it doesn't quite work out the way that it should, I think a lot of that is taken very personally. I mean, I think we tend to take things very personally in this business, and so I want to touch on this a bit, the old and the new, because there are reasons why so much of this doesn't work, and so if we can unload a little bit of some of the blame and kind of put this in perspective, it helps. From that, I also want to talk about a relational framework, and a relational framework that we have developed and have used with a number of organizations over at least 20 years now, and it's a framework that is constantly in evolution. We're constantly learning from it and learning from the organizations that use this. And so I'm going to share with you, what we've come to understand, and maybe you will find some very helpful aspects of this for your purposes. And then from that, I'm going to go more specifically into roles and functions, and especially roles and functions related to board leadership, which has become increasingly critical over the years, and into the larger function of the board and beyond. And I'm going to try to be as specific as I can about this, and I think in this, I want to try and push through as much of this material as I can. If there is a point where something is really not very clear, I do hope that you'll speak up. I can't see everyone, so it'll be important for you to unmute and speak and mention that you have a question or a comment. But then I'm also going to take, I'll be taking a short break, and maybe after the relational framework, so we can take a little bit of a breather, facility break, and maybe get refresh our liquids. And then, but also I'm hoping that I'll be able to get through everything. So at the end, there will be time for questions. But also, just as Ann said, if there's not enough time to cover absolutely everything, we're only an email away or a telephone call. And so you can reach out to us at any time, as well as our associate, Becky Baumwall, who some of you have already met, I believe. Okay, so I wanted to dive first of all into the old versus the new, and talk a little bit about this and some of the theories and the myths that have carried across decades and quite a period of time. I just want to mention first of all that to put this kind of in a framework. One of my favorite critics is Sister Wendy Beckett. Some of you may recall that for a number of years, Sister Wendy had an art appreciation show on BBC, and she's she's a nun and a Capuchin nun. But most of all, she's an art historian. Or not most of all, but she's also an art historian, critic, very, very wise when it comes to art and putting it into perspective. And I saw an interview with her one time, and the interviewer, I think, was really trying to kind of pin her down, because he posed the question, Sister Wendy, what do you believe was better, the art of the Impressionist or the Cubist who followed? And so her response was this: art always changes, it never gets better. And which I thought was a wonderful response. And it's a response that I've used many times when I've been backed into a corner, being asked about art. But it also occurred to me that there's kind of a corollary to that when it comes to boards. And that is that the role of the board always changes, and it never gets easier. And so you can quote me on that too. But the fact is that over the years, so much changes with our arts organizations. The arts and artists and organizations are constantly changing, constantly evolving, in some cases reacting to a lot of external forces, but always in motion. But the thing that's really struck me, and I think quite profoundly, is that of all that change that has occurred over time, it seems that the amount of change that occurs within boards has been the least of all. And in fact, so much of the board received wisdom that so many organizations are trying to employ really hasn't changed since the mid-20th century. And so it has really carried forward, and in many cases, fairly unchanged. And this is, and it's an experience that we've had working with groups in Canada as well as the US. And this kind of phenomenon, how enduring that this kind of mid-20th century board model is. But what we find, and I think we've been finding especially in these last couple of decades, is that we effectively have a mid-20th century board model that is attempting to confront 21st century realities, and it's not always, and increasingly it's not very effective. So our thinking about that is that, and just to kind of underscore this point, and about the changes and the challenges that we're facing. If you stop and think about, and I'm talking here about the last 60, 70 years of time, which is the period of time that we've been living with this not-for-profit arts board model, just how much that art and arts organizations, economies, and our communities have changed in that period of time enormously. If you also think about it, just how much in that same period of time that the lives of our board members, I mean, those who agree to serve on our boards and to commit themselves, just how much their lives, are so much more complex and demanding and stressful than they were 60 years ago, 70 years ago. When I first started working, I came out of dance, and when I first started working in dance, which was about 40 some years ago, I know at that time that it just seemed like that it was only artists and arts professionals who had the joy of working 60 and 80-hour weeks. That has really changed. Everybody is working 60 and 80-hour weeks. There are two-person working households, single-parent households. The amount of change that's occurred in this time in our community partners has been even greater, or as great at least, or even greater than our organizations. And then also, if we think about in this last period of time, 60, 70 years, everyone and everything involved in an arts organization has to do more with less. And it's as a result of whether it's recessions or, whatever it happens to be, it's just like there's always more and more to do and less to do it with. So there's this enduring mid-20th century board theory. These sets of theories and myths are just by their nature so out of sync with all of these 21st century realities and how much things have changed and how much we're confronting in these realities all the time. And so just to kind of illustrate this, I want to talk about a few of these. First of all, about a couple of the theories, just to kind of so you get the idea of what I'm talking about. One of the theories that has carried forward in this time is that the board determines the vision, mission, and planning, and then hires staff to implement the direction. Right. Well, in most examples, and I think the overwhelming majority of organizations, arts organizations I've worked with, in the first place are founded and led by artists. Arts organizations are created to serve the art and to serve the artist, and so it's usually by virtue of a vision that the artist creates the organization to follow a vision and have a mission, and invite our board partners in to be a part of that. And so the idea that the board determines vision and mission, I think it's one of those things that sets the relationship off on at best an ambiguous foot, and at worst sometimes a really conflicted one. Because if it's a professional organization, and I emphasize a professional arts organization, that is, we're putting our work into the marketplace to compete in the marketplace, then only the professionals can determine and put forward a vision and articulate the core values and vision and the mission of that organization. Our board partners are coming to us from legal world and from corporate world and medicine and so forth. In those worlds, they're the professionals. They're the ones who are articulating the visions for what they're doing. So it's been a peculiar kind of burden that we place on boards, when this kind of thing, this kind of a theory is asserted, besides the ambiguity of it. So to be really clear about this, that we expect if it's a professional organization, the professionals have to lead and provide the mission and the vision and the mission. A second theory is that the board is solely responsible for oversight and governance of the organization. And I think this is another one that has been very, not just confusing, but has led to a lot of ambiguity in roles. The fact is, and this is true in both Canada and in the US, that oversight and governance is a shared responsibility. It's one that both board and professional staff share and will be held accountable to. One no more than the other, and they're accountable to each other as well. And I think if anything, and something I like to underscore to arts professionals is that historically speaking, when there have been real problems legally, that is, there have been cases of real malfeasance occur, and there haven't been very many that we know of. That usually, if there's a legal action taken, it will first and foremost be taken against the professional staff. I've really not known a professional or a board member to be brought up on any kind of charges due to malfeasance. There were other consequences, but this is really it is a very much a shared responsibility. As far as myths, I think myths are a little bit more complicated because I think that there is a little bit of reality that always resides in myths, but things change. So one, for example, is that the only way to get someone to do something important for the organization is you have to put them on the board. I think maybe there was a time when that might have been absolutely true. I'm not sure about that, but these days, I think that what we've been seeing, and especially in recent years, that it's likely that you'll be able to get somebody to do something really important for you if they don't have to be on the board and take on all the responsibility of being on the board. And so I think the notion that everything that we do and all the work that needs to get done has to be invested and expected of the board is really to be rethought. That's certainly not the case. A second myth, and I think one that leads to a lot of other aspects here, is that you have to find important people in the community and put them on the board. And by important people, that also usually means, well, either people with deep pockets or who have influence. So first of all, there's something really insulting about that, because that it somewhat assumes that there are no important people already in your audience, when in fact some of the most important people are in your audience, and that really is the place to look and to mind before going anyplace else. But the idea that if we find somebody that's really important in the community, and whether or not they're actually involved with our organization, they know what we do, they really care what we do, if they're important enough that we can get them to be on the board, in some cases maybe trick them to be on the board, but the belief that, well, once they're on the board, they're going to grow to love our work and will be all in. And we find that, well, that's true. I mean, that does occur, but what also occurs is that sometimes individuals will come on a board and then discover this not something that they especially love that much, and rather than really investing in that organization as it is, they begin to try and change it. So that creates a lot of conflict. So I think that this notion, this particular myth, is one that has caused more than a little bit of damage. And I think that where this comes from is this notion, and I do think that there's a little bit of this grounded in some truth and in reality, and that is that as long as someone in the community has some sort of conceptual connection with art, that they can serve on any board, and that they can be a good and effective board member. It's not to say they can't, but that really is making some pretty broad assumptions. Well, today I think that what we're finding is that that more and more that we really need to find board members who don't just have a conceptual connection, but they have a real value connection with our organization, that they really connect with our work, with what we value, and they're connecting with it in a very personal way. And so that value connection allows them to have a real knowledge and a real sense of passion about the work. And I think this is one way that we find that that less and less we have, if we're able to find that value connection with our board members, less and less do we see board members asking for a one-sentence description or that kind of elevator speech some ask for. Because if a board member can just talk about the work of the organization they're involved in and speak from the heart, that says everything. That's better than any kind of an elevator speech. So we really need to find that personal kind of value connection. Something else that's related to this, that's another bit of a throwback, is how much that we've tended, and especially in the mid 20th century, I think that this was true. Philanthropy was very much a part of the life of most arts organizations. And by that, I mean that there were foundations, there were funding sources, individuals who would support, fund, exert influence on behalf of an organization simply because they believed that it was important for the community to have that art, to have that organization. They didn't necessarily have to be in the audience or involved, but they could support it, and would support it no strings attached. All right. Well, this is something that's changed a great deal, because today there's precious little philanthropy. In fact, almost everything is about reciprocity. So, and by that, I mean that there's some kind of exchange. Every grant application you write, which is about what you're going to do for the funder, every proposal you write, that there's going to be an exchange. And I would say about the only place any longer where philanthropy truly exists, that is where someone is supporting because they really believe and there's no strings attached, is likely it is your board. And it's those individual supporters, maybe not on the board, but who are there and supporting on a regular kind of annual basis. But otherwise, we have to really think very differently, because philanthropy is not part of the equation any longer, and I don't see a time when that's going to return. Very much related to this is this idea that there's patronage, and that individuals who have means, that if they can connect with the work enough or with a work enough, that they will assume a kind of patronage and support the work. I think there was a time maybe when there were such patrons, but again, that is something that's changed pretty dramatically. And I think these days what we've found is that individuals who tend to want to support and really want to get involved in some fashion, it's because they really want to invest. I mean, they see it as investment rather than simply a contribution or serving as a kind of patron. And by investor, what is carried with that is a sense that with the contribution or with whatever the support that they provide, that there's an expectation that that's going to result in something, and an expectation tied to something pretty tangible in many cases. And so I think that there's a very good side of that. I think there can also be a very bad side of that. And we have to be aware of intentions and what expectations might be. And then a final thing here, in comparing this mid 20th and early 21st century, is that years ago that inviting somebody to be on the board and explaining to that person that what is expected of them is advocacy was pretty much as much as we expected or asked of certain board members. And but the term advocacy and being an advocate, I think in many ways was pretty passive. And I recall that the first dance company that I managed, that and we talked to board members about coming on the board and being advocates, that in so many cases the perception of that was, well, I'll serve on the board and kind of and give my imprimatur to the work, and whether or not they really care that much about the work, but they sort of give it a good housekeeping seal, as it were, and so that it's okay for others to support this organization. And in some of those cases, they actually felt it was unseemly to do anything other than respond when being asked. The idea of going out into the community and actually, advocating in any kind of an assertive way was simply unheard of. Well, today I think that has really changed a great deal. We need board members who are activists, and by activists I don't mean in a political sense. I know that that's how we tend to think of activism, but I mean an activist in the sense of board members and as well as staff members in the same vein who feel so strongly about the organization they're involved in, and so passionate about the work that they talk about it all the time. Every social situation they're in, they make mention of the fact that they're involved, and why they're involved, and why they're excited about the work, and why the work might be something that someone else would really want to be involved in. And so they really see themselves as out in the community, sort of, helping to deliver the message, helping to carry the work out and spread the word. And so that kind of activism is something that we need far more now than any kind of a passive involvement on the board. Okay. So those are just some of the differences and some of the distinctions I like to make. And I think part of why I like to do this is to say that, to those who are frustrated with the kind of traditional board model and when it doesn't work, just really stop and think about the things that you're doing, and does this really fit with who we are and where we are now? Is it, there's a certain logic. There's nothing here I've mentioned that is really nothing but logic, and what just is not part of the realities that we're all dealing with now. Okay. Before I go on, any very particular, any questions about that, or any comments that anybody would like to toss in? And just unmute, if you will, if you have any thought. Okay. Okay. All righty. Then I'm going to carry on here, and I want to talk a little bit about this relational framework that is a centerpiece of our work. It's a centerpiece really of all of our work, and I think has a very special application when it comes to the way we think about boards. And so when I say a relational framework, so much of the centerpiece of our work really is based on relationships, and something that we've found over the years, and just keep discovering more and more all the time, is that that organizations that function the most positively and that are the most functional are the organizations where we find the best relationships, really high quality relationships, respectful relationships, interactive relationships. And the thing that we've always found about really good relationships, and the best ones we've seen, is especially when it comes to professional leadership and board, is that that there is a real quality sense of partnership involved. And by partnership, what I mean by that is that that partners are partners because they bring separate and distinct qualities to a partnership. If they didn't, there wouldn't really be a need for a partnership. But this is just so fundamental to the leadership partnership that we talk about. That arts professionals bring the art and their passion for the art and the creativity and the value that they bring to the community. At the same and along with that, then our board members bring their passion for the work and their passion for helping the work make connection in the community and to be a really important part of making the community better and so forth. So we always see in the very best relationships that they're very high quality partnerships at work. We also find that that the best partnerships always are within a whole culture. And what I mean by that, and I'll be saying a good deal more about this, is that that it's a whole culture that is organized around the same set of core values and working values, and that we don't have two cultures kind of working one against the other. Where, we don't have an artistic culture and then kind of a separate board culture, and in some cases maybe even an administrative culture. Because when we end up with the organizations that have those kinds of multi-cultures at work, sooner or later there's going to be friction and even conflict. And so the most productive and the really best relationships that we see functioning are within a very much a whole culture. And then finally, what we always find about the best relationships is that that they're always based on what works. What works and what we know works, and just doesn't exist in a kind of theoretical framework. All right. So with that in mind, I go to this very much this centerpiece of our work. Some of you will find this familiar because you've attended one of our either mine or Ann's organizational process and planning workshop. This may be quite new to some of you. That's for that reason I do want to kind of go over this. But this centerpiece is really our belief, and it comes from our belief that for each arts organization, that the artistic process of that organization, and by artistic process I mean creative, curatorial, programmatic, whatever that organization does to determine what goes on stage, what goes on the walls, what happens, how do we do what we do best? How do we produce what we do? That process is the single most effective process for planning, problem solving, decision making, relationship building that is available to that organization. Because if an arts organization is successful, it's not because they have a great marketing plan or fundraising plan. Those are really important. But the success really lies in what's on stage, and what has happened in the studio or, in the gallery that allows them to succeed, because that's where it really begins. And so it's a process that is the most effective for each organization. But it's also something we have to understand, is that what works for one organization doesn't work for another organization. No two artists and no two artistic processes are quite exactly alike. And so what we challenge each and every organization to do is to determine, well, what is your artistic process, and how do you go about understanding and utilizing that process to inform everything that the organization does, because it has an application in everything. And I'm going to explain a little more about that. But first of all, what this diagram is illustrating is that at the center, and this is, by the way, this is not a model, because something that's very important to say is that arts action research, we do not believe in models. We don't believe there is a model. We believe that you are your own model. Each organization has its own way of working, its own model, but beyond that, there's no other model. There are some great examples, and we use examples and enjoy using examples, but the real challenge to each organization is to really understand what your own model is and what works for you. So so illustrated in this, and what this illustration is showing is that for each organization, at the center represents the artistic center. And by the artistic center, that means well, who is at the center? Who is at that artistic center, that professional arts center? It may be a single artistic director. It may be two or more collaborating artistic directors. It may be an artistic director and a managing director. You know, there's that kind of an example. But it's what each organization really defines is its center, and what is most appropriate at its center. And what we find with most arts organizations is that the most artistic leaders at the center, that there will be an initial circle that we refer to as a group of core collaborators. And the core collaborators are made up of a creative team of members. And this may be for a theater, for example, and I'm kind of using some theater examples just to stick with a single example. There may be a playwright, there may be a director, or maybe designers. In the case of a dance company, it may be a choreographer, but also a theater. But this core of collaborators is usually made up of professionals. It may also be administrative staff, but it's who usually a fairly small group of individuals who the artistic leader very, very specifically designates as kind of a kitchen cabinet. It's a real kind of brain trust. And this group is here, this is designated as such because these are individuals who really get what this artist is doing, who really gets and understands what this artist is trying to do and what this organization's about. And because they likely have a bit of a relationship, there's also a very high level of trust. And with that high level of trust, what that usually means is that there's no holding back. You know, when you sit down at the table to have a discussion about a new work or a season, you know, everybody is up front. You know, there's no withholding. You know, you can say what needs to be said. Nobody gets hurt. You know, everybody's good with this. And that level of trust is all important. We also find that there's this second circle that we refer to as a connected group of collaborators. And this is made up of, well, maybe actors, it may be an ensemble, it could be dancers, musicians, what have you. But this is when it's time to take a project the next steps. This is when we call together those who are going to be part of the project. It may involve an audition process. It may be a standing ensemble, like I said. But if it is an audition process, if someone has worked with this artist before, they likely stand a better chance than some of the others because they know how this artist works. Because team members in this group, in this connected group, probably have this kind of relationship with other centers, and they know that, well, how that center, how those other ones work is very specific to them, but they know how this one works, And so we also find if somebody has to be replaced within that core group of collaborators, they will almost always be replaced, they will always be replaced by someone from that connected group, that connected circle. Because already with these circles, you can begin to see a kind of culture taking place that's really taking shape here. Because these are artists who, the artistic leader has worked with, they understand the process, and already they're building a basis of trust. And so that an individual there may be invited into the core. Well, what's really interesting about that is that group of connected collaborators, they don't get together and kind of vote on who might go into the core. No, that person's invited in. And it's also not by seniority. It may be one of the newer members of that connected group, but it may be somebody who really gets the artist. It may get that artistic leader, and so they're invited in. But everybody understands that's how it works. The movement is from the outside in that fashion. And again, it's based on, is this someone who really gets the work, and are we building a basis of trust? Is there a basis there? And then there's that third circle we refer to as a needs-specific circle of team members. And this has to do with the fact that every project every play, every dance, every music performance, every exhibition, there's going to be some design element. There may be a lighting element, there may be a specialized role, but we may have to go outside those first two circles and find someone who can provide that very specific service. So we have to bring them in for that project. While they're involved in the project, they're treated just like everybody else. You wouldn't know the difference. But by the same token, they have to work the way we work. They have to be able to observe our culture, our value system. And if they can't, then they have to go. They have to leave. We have to recast. We have to find somebody else, or we'll change the work. Because artistic leaders know, directors know, choreographers know, who are working in this fashion, that the most important thing we have is the work. And one person can't violate the values and can't damage the work. That's all we've got. So that way of working, and we also know that those in that neat specific circle, we may use them one time and never again. They may, but they understand. We understand. That's the deal that we struck. But we may also find that that there's a real connection here, and so we want to have them return. Maybe even want them to move into that next circle, and maybe participate on a more regular basis, and eventually even into the core. So it's just another way of saying that the movement is always from the outside in, and based on, do they really get what we're trying to do here and really add value? And are we building trust? Is that element of trust? Okay. So that's the way we characterize the nature of our artistic relationships based on the artistic process. And again, this is not a model, but over the years, as we talk about this particular approach, this kind of framework, I think we found that theater artists, dance artists, curators all agree that this really is a very accurate characterization of the kinds of relationships they have, and especially how much trust plays into the equation. Trust is so very, very critical here. Okay. So then, if that is the best way that we operate in terms of our artistic process and the basis of our success on stage, then we turn and we look at what we consider the traditional board model. And by the traditional board model, I mean that model that we've received basically is the not-for-profit model. Now, this is something that we see in the US. In our work in Canada, we've seen this quite a bit. But this is just typically the way that if organizations put together a kind of organizational chart and describe the nature of relationships, this is approximately the kind of thing that we see. With first of all, the board on top, out to the side of the board, those little boxes that indicate standing committees, like finance, fundraising, marketing, I don't know, something else, but those standing committees. And then, of course, there would be an executive committee that is functioning in the place of the board when the board is a meeting. And then eventually we get down to the artistic director, and then maybe an artistic director, managing director, and then all those separate functions on either side of things, and that kind of very hierarchical kind of a structure. All right. But then, if we put these two together and we compare the nature of that particular structure on the left, which represents the artistic process and how we work best as an artistic entity, and this sort of characterization of a not-for-profit board and an organization, you have to ask yourself, what's wrong with this picture? All right. It's an absolute clashing culture. And when we talk about organizations that are experiencing stress or some kind of a conflict between the professional leadership and the professional staff and the board, or just even having difficulty trying to make connections, in terms of how we're all working together, this is where we usually go back to. This is really where we get things off on the wrong foot, because we've already, in this example, have created two separate cultures. All right. And the thing I like to emphasize about this is if there's any doubt about how effective is that artistic process on the left, if you take the example of Western European theater as one example, Western European theater has been working in this fashion probably only about 2,500 years. And so when you're talking to professional theater artists about this kind of a framework, it is something that is so deeply ingrained in the way that they work, they don't even necessarily value how much it works and how functional it is. This not-for-profit structure, on the other hand, is certainly in the US. I suspect that it may be a parallel also in Canada, but that it dates back a total of about 100 years, because it goes back to the advent of the not-for-profit, philanthropic and charitable organizations, and is something that was carried forward largely by foundations, because this was really the structure adopted by many foundations. So that's the nature of the structure that we've inherited. So if we agree that there's a fundamental disconnect between these cultures and functions, this is what has now led us, and for a while has led us to believe that if that left side is the artistic process, is the most effective process we have, then we really need to be mirroring that on our community or our board side. And also I'll say we often refer to our board partners as our community partners, and they're by virtue of community. So for example, in the same way that we have a group of core collaborators on the artistic side, we also need that core board on the board side. And that is that smaller group of individuals who really get what we're doing. They know the work. They've seen the work long enough that they really have a deep understanding about it. They really value the work, and they've been involved with us long enough that we built a very strong bond of trust. And so there's no withholding. There's no sidestepping things. There's honest conversations. There's the ability to really be very frank about the things that we're discussing and trying to decide upon. We also know that we need that second group because we need the balance of the board. And so that second circle there, the board or the key volunteers on the board, we need, because we have a lot of functions that we really need our board to help us carry out. A lot of connections in the communities, within the community. Plus, we need to know where our next board leadership is going to come from. Because in the same way as on that artistic side that we replace core collaborators with those from that connected circle, we're going to bring new leadership in from that key volunteer section. And so that these are individuals who are there and know our work, and we're already building that bond of trust and connection. And I think this is a place where we see a lot of problems arise when organizations feel that they have to bring somebody in who's not been on the board from the community at large to serve in a board leadership role. That, as tempting as that may be, or may seem at the time, is something that is really full of a lot of risk. And so we believe that we really need to have that second circle, not only for all the jobs that need to be done, but we have to be cultivating our next leadership all the time. And then that third circle, the task that's labeled here, task-specific volunteers, and I'm going to go into these more specifically in terms of roles, but I touch on this to draw the comparison. But that task-specific group of volunteers, that's a circle of individuals who can do something for us, but they don't have to be on the board to do it. because those first two circles, that is the core of the board and the key volunteers in the board, that's as much board as we need. Whatever size, whatever configuration they are, that is pretty much the board that any organization really needs. Beyond that, within that task-specific group of volunteers, there's a very wide range of things that can be done, and can be done by people who don't have to be on the board. They don't have to attend the board meetings and be there all the time, but they can do something for us. Maybe one thing and never again, and we can thank them and they go on their way. Or maybe somebody who can do that certain something, maybe head up a certain fundraiser or something of that sort at least once a year. And we know that we can call on them and they know that they can be called on. But they also know they can do something for our organization, but then, then go and do something for their child's school or to do some other organization, for their church or whatever their other priorities are. So we also know that that's a great audition pool for new board members. And that's really where we can look for our new talent. And I'll touch on that a little bit more, like I said. But the thing that's also great about this task-specific group of volunteers is that there's no limit to of the size and scale of this group, because they don't meet as a group. We're talking to them about very specific things. So this group can be, 10, 20, 30, it can be a vast number of people and who are doing very specific things. The challenge here is keeping track of what we know they can do for us and do well, and making sure that we're keeping in touch with them and being effective on that side. So I'll go more into that. So at this point, I also like to emphasize the fact that this relational framework, and as you may have already picked up to a degree, this relational framework not only describes the nature of the relationships we have, but it also is a really helpful way of developing a strategic framework. Because based on the relationships we have, because so much of what an arts organization does is in fact based on the relationships we have with our audiences, with our funders, as well as with our community and board members, that the nature of those relationships can then be devised and put together in ways that are much more strategic, much more efficient in terms of how we're relating, how we're engaging, how we're drawing on the special talents of those inappropriate relationship levels with us. And so I'm going to talk more. I'm going to take a little break here, but I am going to talk more about then the specific roles and functions of the board. But then, as Alex was mentioning, we're going to be doing workshops on audiences, one called Growing Audiences that I'm going to be doing. Ann Dunning, my associate, is going to be doing a session on relational fundraising and development. And that she's going to talk about the relationship with funders. And in each one of these cases, what you'll find is that along with describing relationships and the nature of relationships, we're also going to be talking about a strategic framework for approaching and for how we use our time, how we use our resources in the most effective and efficient way possible. Okay. So with that, I'm going to say, let's take 5, and we can turn our cameras off, sound off, hit the facility, refresh our glasses of water or whatever liquid, and meet back here in about 5 minutes or so. Okay. We'll get started up here in about a minute. Okay, is everybody gathered again? It's kind of hard to tell. Okay, thumbs up, that's good. Yep, good. Good to see. All right. Oh, I'd love to see all those thumbs. Okay, all right. Before I launch into the next part, because I'm going to start talking about, I want to go into some of the roles and functions of the board, picking up where I left off. Are there any questions right now? Questions, comments before pushing on? I want to make sure and have time at the end of this for questions, but anything right now that's really
Hi, I just have something super fast, Nello.
Sure.
I really love the comparison of, how can we make our board structure mirror our artistic structure? And I don't know that I have it's a question, it's more of a comment. And I wonder, is there a way to do that at the admin level too? So that's where kind of my brain goes, because I feel like the admin level is still very much that traditional board level structure.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all my comment is, just how do I, as a, an arts leader, think about incorporating that into my staff so it's all the same culture across the board. So just a comment. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, it's a very good comment, and it's one that is absolutely that we believe very strongly that the staff needs to reflect the same quality of relationships and the same quality of process as the artistic process. And we've seen a lot of different variations. And along the way, I think with some of the other workshops, we'll probably be talking a little bit more about some of the administrative and staff structures and how they relate to both the artistic process and to the board. So but in all cases, really that orienting toward the center and the relationships, toward the leadership at the center and the level of trust and connection that various staff members have, just as I've described how board members have. So we've seen a number of variations of that, and usually it's a reflection of the actual artistic process. And I think some of you who are involved in the one-on-one work, you'll likely be doing some of that with Anne and with Becky. Okay. Good. Anything else? Shall I? Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to go back into the slides and carry forward here with some of the roles and the functions. Okay. And so first of all, I'm going to talk about this. So I pulled the section out, the quadrant out of the board, the community side that was in that larger circle. And so just to begin with, the first part of it here is, and at that point is the center. You can kind of imagine that. But at the center, and this has become almost axiomatic for us, which is that that the quality of the board leadership is directly proportionate to the effectiveness of the full board. And I think it's always been true to some degree, but I think now more than ever that we really look to the board leadership to be able to help bring the board along, help the board become the most effective that it can be. But to do that, we have to make the board leadership the most effective that it can be. And so, so we've developed what we refer to as the distributed leadership approach to board leadership. And this is based on our belief and experience that that the board leadership in the past, from the received model that we've worked with, over the years, that the board leadership was pretty poorly defined, and the understanding and expectations of board roles and relationships was almost never really defined. And that is that most organizations had it was expected by law to have a chair or a president. I mean, the terms used interchangeably, depending on the organization, a treasurer and a secretary. So normally it's those three roles. And so, so what we found is that but of those three roles, the one especially that becomes almost overwhelmed because so much is expected, although it's not entirely clear everything, or how it's expected, is the role of the board chair or the president. And so that's because the expectations have been associated, on the one hand, with the role that the board leader, that board chair or president, that they have in terms of being the outward face of the organization, or sort of representing the organization of the board, to the community, along with the professional leadership, of course. But at the same time, that there's an expectation that that individual is going to lead and manage the board to be as effective as it can be. And so, so what we found is that that as time has gone on and the need has grown greater for the board to do more and to be more involved in the life of the organization, that job of one single individual has become almost impossible. It's almost become overwhelming. So so we've just come at this in the approach of, well, we need to distribute the roles a little bit more. And so that's why I've characterized here at the center. And we've broken this down into at least 5 positions: a chair, a president or a board advocate, which is what that BA stands for, a treasurer, a secretary, and the BRW. I'll explain what that is when I get to it here. Okay, so I'm going to go on through. So first of all, we've taken this the first that role of the chair or president, and we've broken it into 2 jobs, and basically the 2 distinct jobs as I described them. Because on the one hand, I mean, there is that role of external leader. And so I'll say, for example, that that we would view the chairperson as the external leader. And so this needs to be someone who, in the first place, is comfortable in the public eye, would likely be someone who is cast well, so that they're not only comfortable, but they also they get their phone calls returned. I mean, they have those contacts. There's a reason why they can be effective in the external leader. And some people are very comfortable in that role, and others are not so much. And I'll say right off the bat that the terms I'm using, chair, president, so forth, these are all very traditional terms. I say use the terms as you would see fit. This is not an absolute from my point of view. The important thing about this is breaking the jobs up and making them doable and definable. And that's what we're really trying to achieve here. And so that the chair would be that external leader, of he or she, or they would be the leader in the external aspect. And then our president or board advocate, and I have 2 terms here for this. There may be others, but Some organizations we've worked with, for whatever reason, feel like they're either uncomfortable having both a chair and a president, or they may have already designated a professional staff member president, as a designated title, but what have you. But, and so in which case, fine, come up with another term, come up with another name. Board advocate is one that a lot of our organizations have used, because the idea of the president of the board advocate is to be the internal leader. And what we're really looking for here in this individual is someone who can really help the board live up to its potential. Someone who is comfortable as a more internal leader, more of an internal maybe manager, can work very closely with the chair, but also with the professional staff in terms of identifying the strengths of every one of our board members, and working to help each one of those individual board members become really effective at what they do. And so it may involve having an individual meeting. Some of the groups we work with even develop agreements. The board president, the board advocate will develop an agreement that they sit down with each individual board member about what that board member is going to do and what they feel like they can commit to. And we have some samples of those, which we can share at some point. I didn't really have the ability to do that here today, but I've often found that board members really value an agreement because it spells out what's expected, and they're able to really discuss one-on-one very specifically what they feel that they can do. And so the board advocate or the president, is much like the chair, would be cast in this role, cast in a role that he, she, or they is really comfortable fulfilling and can really fulfill well. And the thing about these two roles is that if you cast them well, the right person as that external and that right person as internal, one would never succeed the other, because they're really two different types. And so you wouldn't have one succeed the other any more than you would cast the male role and the female lead if the change occurred. So, it's really kind of common sense. But even better than that is that what that really allows is if you put the chair and the president in particular on rotating cycles of no less than 2 years, that when one rotates, you don't rotate both of them, that there's continuity built into this by virtue of having one of those leaders in continuous service. And so that kind of period you have when a new leader comes on board, they have to learn a year before they can be really effective. There'll be a little bit of a lag, but it won't be what it was before. And so you build in the continuity. I think the other thing here that I always like to say is, to organizations, because I've had some say, well, we have so-and-so who is really such an effective leader externally and internally that, we really feel like we want to stick with the old model of doing this. That's fine. I have no objections to that. If you find somebody who's really that good, the problem with that, though, is finding somebody to replace them. Because if someone is that good, somebody can do all those things and is willing to do all those things, it's not likely there are a lot of others on the board waiting in the wings who will do the same thing. So it may be a practice that you'll find your way to at some point, because no board leader stays in place for all time, nor should they. I think the other thing that we have found is that in the past, when individuals have been cast and you stick to a single role, that either chair or president, all we're really describing here is kind of what board leaders tend to find for themselves. Because my experience has been that if you have a board leader who is a really good external leader, but it's also expected they're going to be the internal leader, normally what they'll do is what they do best, and then they won't really do the rest of it. And so whatever they're not doing will usually end up falling to the professional leadership. And so there'll have to be some kind of adjustment made there by the professional staff. Sometimes that works and it works fine, but it's so much better if you can find the two individuals who can really fulfill these roles well. Okay, moving on. Then we come to the treasurer. The treasurer is a financial interface. This is fairly constant. But one distinction that we make about this is that we really believe the treasurer needs to be someone who is really knowledgeable about the financial side of things and has had some experience like that. In my experience, I think that individuals who are involved with a small business are by far the most ideal choices, because they understand what it is to run a business, and what we run in the arts are businesses. And I think the notion of getting a certified public accountant, a CPA, or I think the worst treasurers are usually bank executives. And simply because bank executives operate on such a level that very few of them really have the kind of experience on a level that we really want them to function as a treasurer. So, so I think, aim correctly as opposed to what you're, again, do what you're supposed to do, not what you need to do, I'm sorry, let me get that back. I got that backwards. Do what you need to do, not what you're supposed to do. That's it. I'll get this right. Our view of this treasurer, though, is that one of the most important things, if you really find somebody qualified and someone who the board can look to and say, we can all have confidence in this person. They really understand what they're doing. So it's possible then for the treasurer and the appropriate staff member to say to the board, I got this, and so if there's something, really requiring a lot of financial focus, we'll call a special meeting. We'll bring this to your attention. You'll know about it. But otherwise, what we need most of the board to really be doing is focusing on the really important work, which is generating resources, spreading the word. I find organizations that have large finance committees usually have a lot of people who would rather oversee the expenses than go out and try and generate the income. And while it's good to kind of keep track of things, if you have the individual who can do it, we don't need everybody to be spending their time on that. We need more energy being expended to do the work, within the community. So that trust of the treasurer is a very big part of this. Okay. Now that BRW that you saw is what we refer to as the board resource whip. And the board resource whip, and we use whip here in the kind of political sense. How in Parliament, in houses in our Congress and so forth, they tend to serve a function of helping whip members, into shape, I guess. But they're also principal strategists. So that's always been the nature of minority whips, majority whips as well. So on the board, what we see as the board resource whip is that individual who might otherwise be the chair of the fundraising committee or that sort of thing, because we know that if a fundraising and development committee is effective, most likely it's because you have an individual leading that committee who is really good. They're either very knowledgeable or they have great energy about this. They're very strategic. Strategic is really important here. And so rather than having them on a committee, then it's let's put them in this leadership group, because they're going to be working and interfacing very closely with the chairperson, who is going to be the external person out doing a lot of our efforts in the community. They're going to be working very closely with the president, who's going to be working with our individual board members about their individual contributions, as well as how they're going to be working and working hand in hand with our board resource whip. But this is also where the really good strategy is developed with the staff. And so we want somebody placed in this role in a very, very careful, very well cast way. And I keep using that word cast, because one of the things that's great about the artistic process, and whenever we ask directors or choreographers or music directors, for example, if we ever ask a director, to what degree do you attribute success of a play, or do you attribute casting to the success of a play? usually what we hear them say is something in the 90 percentile. 95% is, we rly on casting. If you cast well, you have a chance to succeed. If you don't cast well, you either have to recast or you have to change the work, and you have less of a chance to succeed. So I'm using the word casting here in the very same way. We're putting people in roles where they're cast well and they can function effectively. Finally, in this group, there's a secretary, and I put optional here because I think with a lot of organizations, the secretary does, well, they'll serve a certain kind of a legal function, but they're also involved usually with communications. They take minutes of the meeting. They circulate those minutes. They circulate other information. If you happen to have someone who is really, really good at that, that's terrific. Someone who can really provide that kind of communications work. But it's not something that is necessarily to bend over backwards trying to find. And whatever legal aspects that person does can also be transferred to the treasurer, to the board president. That's not difficult to do. But I think a good person who's very good in communications can be very helpful here. Okay, so those elements of the board leadership, and when I say distributed, so what you have here is taking the jobs, the tasks, the roles that we're really looking to the board leadership to do, and distributing them in terms of more specific tasks, better defined tasks, and cast by with the person who can best do them. And so also, as we're thinking about future leaders, how they're going to be casting these roles. Now, something you'll notice that's not here is vice anything. There's no vice chair, no vice president, no vice anything. And the reason for that is that the single most ambiguous role on any board is the vice anything. Vice chair, vice president, and it makes me crazy, because a vice chair, for example, all it really does is suggest succession of that person into the chairperson's role. But I've also seen so many cases, especially of late, where someone will agree to be a vice chair if they don't have to be the chair. So it makes no sense. It's a waste of a role. It makes a lot more sense to have really well-defined roles in this distributed board leadership team, and then be working with your board president in particular, identifying who in the balance of our board is really going to be able to step into the appropriate role, and begin cultivating that person and start preparing them to do that role. Okay. Okay, the next circle, I'll go to the board. And so the board function here, the balance of the board. I have here 7 members, filling out the board. It might be 4. I've worked with organizations that have an equal number of people in the board leadership as they have on the board, because those board leadership roles are so important. But this may also be a larger group as well. So there's no exact number, although we have found that boards sizes are tending to trend smaller and have for quite some time, and simply because it's more effective having a smaller group who can be more effective than a large group out of which you're hoping a few will be effective, which is an incredible waste of time. And so I think a smaller group or the right size group is what you're really looking for. So among things that we're looking for the board to do in terms of roles and functions, I'm going to quickly kind of go through these. I think most of you probably had these, but I'll just mention how we think about them. First of all, any board member, anyone coming onto the board has to know and support the work, the vision, the mission. And by that I mean that no board member, and this should be an absolute written in stone law, rule of the organization. Nobody comes on the board if they haven't come through the work. You have to know the work. You have to come out of the audience. It may be somebody you've identified you would like to be on the board who is not in your audience. Find a way to get them into your audience and find out if they like the work first. Find out if they connect with the work. They may absolutely love it, and that makes it easy. it takes them time, take the time. If they're not connecting with the work, don't make them, you missed the mistake of putting them on the board then, so they must come through the work, and they need to know and support it and understand and know the vision, the mission. We also want them to exert influence. We expect every single board member to not only exert influence, but as a function of exerting influence, help us build a network. We need to build a network of influence in our community. And I say this because, in particular, I would say in these last 15, 20 years, this is another thing that has changed so much about our communities. Not that many years ago, going back 15, 20 or more, the power structures and influence structures within our communities were very vertical. That is, that you had a power structure usually controlled either by community leaders, or it might be controlled by by educational institutions, or there may be foundations might be there where there's a lot of power invested. Cities are kind of known in that fashion, and so if you want to be able to get into the power structure, you have to find somebody who's plugged into whatever that vertical structure is. That was the rule in the past. Well, what's happened in the last 15, 20 years is that power structures have become horizontal. And that's to say that the power and influence within any given community anymore is distributed among maybe 12 or 15 relative points of power and influence. And so for an arts organization to be able to make something happen or to keep something from happening, that is to exert influence, that we have to have our foot in the door within at least half or more of those relative points of power and influence. So the board is really critical in doing that, in terms of, do we have somebody connected with our community leadership or with our educational communities or our foundation communities, so forth. So we're really looking for points of entry, no more or less than, I should say, no less than 2 degrees connection with those points of power. So we want to build a network. We want to know we have that network. So along that line, what we're looking for is, first of all, and this is one of the things our external leader, our chair, leads the process in doing this, is what are the relative points of power and influence within our community? So, so this particular diagram here comes to you from a group I worked with called by the name of Visual Arts Exchange, and they're in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I worked with them for about 5 years. And they actually saw themselves, they were based in Raleigh, had a gallery in Raleigh, but they actually saw themselves, having influence as an organization in the Triangle, which was Durham, Chapel Hill, Cary, the whole area. So when we first started talking about, well, what are your relative points of power in the Triangle, and who on your board represents points of connection that you already have with those points of power? Well, when they started, the board chair led them through a discussion of what are their points of power. This is what they came up with. And so they came up with that they have, real estate development, which has a leg in arts and design, government, of course, because that's where the state capital is, and of course in law, and then the big education schools there are very important, Duke, University of North Carolina, so forth and so on. And so these are all the relative points of power and influence, also how they connect with each other. When they started looking then and overlaying their board and asking each board member to identify their relative points of connection, because each board member was asked, well, what are your networks? And of course, every board member always comes back and says, well, I don't have any networks. Well, then they have to be reminded, well, yes, you do have networks, and they were using this kind of example here because you have neighbors, you have lovers of art who you have people in your business, your community. And so you really stop and think about all the spheres of influence that you have. You really have quite a network. And so when they started doing that, and then they overlaid their points of connection with what they said were the triangles, they were all, I think they had a board of 12 people, and they were almost all clustered right at education and arts and design. And it's because their board, originated, and they brought all their friends on who also happen to be in arts and design and education. So, so it was a real indication to them that they had a very narrow reach into the triangle, and especially for this organization, because they were about to launch a capital campaign to build a new building and to extend themselves into Durham. So, so beginning at that point, they started rethinking how they were bringing new board members on and how they were recruiting board members, how they were introducing people to the Visual Arts Exchange. And it was really kind of surprising because within 3 years, they had managed to expand and extend the reach of their influence significantly within this this overlay. So I thought that was a really good example, and it's a way of thinking now about networks. So as you're working on your exerting influence, building a network, so how does that work within your individual community, and how does that work within your board? Okay. So the third thing we expect a board is a leadership contribution. Of course, now this is a no-brainer. Don't have to dwell on this. We expect, that we need to have 100% participation by board members in making contributions. Some organizations will sort of set a bar, that every board member gives X amount. Some organizations go according to what each board member, what is a meaningful leadership contribution of each and every board members, which in more recent years I've tended to favor, because I've found, and I've seen so many instances where there's always a mix of board, especially if you begin to really diversify the board, you really find there's different levels of capability. And you have some people who will bring certain kinds of influence, and especially in the network, who may not be able to give a large amount, but they can really have tremendous influence, and they have great value elsewhere. So it's a way, again, to tailor how we're thinking about our board and not being monolithic about that. We also, we expect every board member to participate in development and fundraising, and you'll notice here that I have fundraising in parentheses because I think that one of the things that has a tendency to send board members screaming from the room is when we ask our board members to go out there and raise money for us, because nobody likes to raise money. Nobody likes to ask for money. Well, I take that back. There are a few very, very unusual people who absolutely live to ask for money. And if you got one of those, God bless you. That's wonderful. But by and large, most board members really are not fond of doing it. A lot of staff members aren't. But that's not really what we're asking our board members to do. Because what we're really asking our board members to do is not the fundraising, because fundraising by definition is asking for money. And you don't ask for money unless there's a context for giving the money, which means that, for example, we're applying to a foundation because we know that they support the arts. They have guidelines. There's a context there. Or certain individuals who may be contributors, we know that they tend to give. Okay. But if there's not a context, then that's really where development comes in, because another term for development is cultivation. This is really how we create a context for those who don't already know how much they want to give us money. And so those are individuals who are in our network that we've been building. Those are individuals that we may have knowledge and connection to in various institutions. But it's also just a function of how we develop information and knowledge about the different people who we bring to our work. We get them involved, and so we find ways to warm up the relationship, to bring them closer, inform them more. That's all about development. So whereas board members may not be comfortable and may not be that good at asking for money, what every board member can do if they know and support the work and they really are connected to the work, they can talk about the work. They can talk about why they love it, why they value it, what it means to the community, what it can mean if we just get that much more of a contribution. But they don't actually have to talk about money. And I say to organizations, identify the people. Usually it is staff, maybe some of those leaders in the leadership circle. But identify those who can ask for money and do it effectively. But make sure that the balance and the rest of the board members are really focusing on that development aspect, because we do a good job of development. The fundraising is easy. That's a piece of cake. And we often say, it's like fundraising is that much, development is that much, so that's the big job. All right. So we always start off when we're working with boards is we start off by saying, don't ask for money. Because part of the thing is too, that if someone is not comfortable asking for money, there's always the risk that they may go to a really good source that's not ready yet. We haven't developed them enough. And they ask for the wrong amount, or they make a clumsy ask, and we're in trouble. So we don't want people asking if they're uncomfortable. We really want them to do the development. Okay. Beat that one up enough. Okay. All right. Then finally, the fifth thing is to build an audience, widen the circle. This is very much related to building a network, of course. And an aspect of this is building the network, because here again, we don't always know who we're bringing into the audience. But the fact is, we know that we have to widen the circle. We have to bring people to the work. And no matter how effective your marketing campaign is, how effective your strategies are in developing an audience, we know historically the most effective way of building an audience is word of mouth. And the best word of mouth comes immediately from your board. I mean, it comes from the board, the people who know the work best, going out and talking about the work, bringing people, from where they work, from their church, from their faith communities, from wherever, neighbors, but bringing them to the work, and not forcing people to see the work, but bringing them in the hope and desire that they're going to love the work. And in many cases they do, and especially when that kind of direct personal contact is made, it does make a difference. It makes a huge difference. Okay. So going now to that third circle, I promised to talk about this. This is what we call the resource circle. The resource circle is made up of the non-board members. Those people are not on the board, and they can function in individual ways to help us do something. Now, these geometric forms here suggest that within the resource circles, we may have certain groups that are distinct, that we may identify as a distinct group. For example, one of those groups, with a lot of the theaters that I work with here in New York, will have within their resource circles, they'll have a political action team, a political action resource circle. And that's usually made up of those who are in the political arena. And because they know how things work there, they can be effective there. And if you put them on the board, they would be less effective because then they're in conflict. And so they can be especially effective in that resource group. So when we think about that resource circle, the things that we're really looking for here is, number one, we're looking for access to resources, and we're hoping that we get access to resources. We also have in this circle what we refer to as, which are our board emeritus members. And that subgroup within the resource circle, I think every organization should have a board emeritus group, only have a snazzy name attached to it, not emeritus. It's an honor board, it's our maybe founding members or what have you, but it's those board members who have served well, and we don't want to lose track of them. We don't want them to lose track of us. So because we know that those board emeritus members very often can be some of the best who can lead us to new resources or keep us connected to old resources. And we really, really want that. So we think that, every group should have a board emeritus group. And within that board emeritus group, there are certain things we can ask them. We can ask them, number one, make sure you keep coming to our performances. Make sure you keep bringing people to our performances. Make sure that you, but also if you become aware of a group out there or someone who can help us, please lead us to them. We can also ask board emeritus, and a lot of our groups we work with will also ask board emeritus members to continue contributing at the same level they contributed when they were on the board, when they were giving their leadership gift. Because this then becomes an amount of money that might go into what some groups refer to as a board emeritus fund. And the board emeritus fund may, in some cases, I know it's been used as a creative capital fund, that is money, unrestricted money, that can be used in commissioning new work, and for a whole wide range of things. And so it's a great way of getting unrestricted money. Some groups have used that as a way to also build their unrestricted funds for for cash flow. Get them through cash flow difficulties and so forth. Okay. Let's sip of water. Okay, and finally, with this resource group, this other subset that we have listed is a board development group. And this is a group that is in the resource circle who we are considering for the board. And these are largely made up of individuals who likely don't know that they're part of this group, because we've seen them at work. We know of the things that they can do. In some cases, they may have been doing some work for us several years running. That's terrific. So we feel like that it's time to bring them on the board. We may have asked them in the past, and they've said, well, they serve on other boards, or they have other things going on, and they're not ready. And so maybe, but the time might have come for them to be ready. So we can bring them on the board and bring them very directly. That's a really great resource. And here again, there's no limit to how many people we can have in the resource circle. There's no limit to how many people we can have in these subsets either. The board emeritus group will grow as board members leave the board, new board members come on, and we stay connected to those former board members. And I do believe firmly that board members should rotate off. I do think that a time will come. I don't know, there have to be really strict rules about terms, but I do believe that the time comes when people, need to take a break, need to go off the board, but they can also stay in touch. They don't have to leave our sphere of influence. Okay. The one last thing I want to make mention of is making board meetings more effective. I'll touch on this briefly because I'm running out of time. But one thing I always say is reduce or eliminate reporting. Entirely too much time is taken up with reporting about things we've done. Reporting should go out before board meetings, either by the person who might have led a task force or a committee or what have you, or a staff member. And then everything else at this board meeting, though, is about looking forward. And so that we're not looking backwards. I also think that the discussions all need to be strategic discussions, and they need discussions and deliberations. And by strategic, it's a way of looking ahead at this next quarter or whatever period of time before the next board meeting, being fully aware of what we need to accomplish in this next period of time, and discussing very fully, well, what are our strategies? And keeping in mind that strategy is logic. Logic is a series of iterations. Say, if then, that is, if we do this, then this will happen. And that's just based on what we know, that based on maybe our best guess, but it constitutes strategy. And when that strategy doesn't work, we change strategy. But when it does work, we build on it. We do more of that. And so our discussions are always really about not just what we're going to do, but how we're going to do it, how we're going to achieve it, and also who's going to do it. And that also leads us to getting into specifying the tactics and the actions, the tactics we're going to take, and also especially the follow-up. And the follow-up, and increasingly, if you have the kind of distributed leadership board that I referred to, you're going to have board members who will be doing more of the follow-up. The board president will be doing that. The board resource whip will be doing that. In certain instances involving external factors, then the board chair will be. I also believe that we have to limit the time to 1 hour, 1.5 hours. We don't want to burn board members out by meeting. And that happens all too often, okay? All right, so that's where we are. I put that here, but I'm going to stop this and say, with the bit of time remaining, I threw a lot of stuff at you folks here, and I'm sorry about that, but I really had to cover all that stuff. It's all important. Any questions, comments?
Is that PowerPoint available to us?
I think, well, this particular workshop has been taped, has been recorded. What I usually do, and I'm very happy to do, but I'll do this with Alex's agreement, is that I will put together a PDF of the slides and send it that he can distribute to all of you, or you can request it from him. Is that possible, Alex?
Yeah, yes, you can request it. Again, because of everyone's names and we don't have everybody's emails in this. So Carmel will be doing a couple of things. She'll be sending out the recording of today's, as Nella mentioned. So you could always scrub through that to find the slides and the explanation. Secondly, she'll be including upcoming dates for the webinars for those that weren't able to get it from the chat. And then in that same email, we can attach the PDF that Nella's mentioned. We have the capacity to send it to all of the organizations, Sask Arts funds, through Sask festivals and PayOp. For those who aren't receiving funding from Sask Arts there, we can share this with our partners at Creative Saskatchewan, and they can provide it to you, or just email myself. My email is very available, but I'll throw it in the chat. And then if you don't get it through one of those channels over the next few days, you can always just email me directly and I'll forward it to you. I hope that helps.
That's terrific, Alex. Thank you. And I will have this. I'll have this in a PDF form to send you tomorrow morning. Okay.
Great.
Questions, comments?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I was really interested in the last slide you showed there about reduce or eliminate reporting and looking forward. And I'm, as Anne can attest to, wherever she is here, I've been talking to her a lot about alternative board structures, and I'm really interested in doing things differently. How do we reassure our board members that the work that we're, our strategic planning and whatever, what we're working towards is being done, if we're just talking about sort of, if every meeting is about what we're going to do and not sort of reassuring them that the stuff I said at the last meeting actually got done, or that the board members who committed to helping with certain projects actually did what they said they were going to do? Yeah,
that's a good question. Well, ideally, that you're going to be planning for the next quarter, the next period of time, based on a larger strategic plan, a larger plan for the year. Minimally, you have an approved budget for the year and a plan for the year. I mean, based on what you plan to do, and then to the degree possible, if you have a more detailed or fleshed out strategic plan, then that plan will be broken up into the component parts of quarters, or however you're divided up your year. So they'll all have that as a backdrop reference. They all should have a copy of that, for their own reference, and fully expected to review it and ask questions. And that would be another job of the president of the board, would be make sure they all have it, they understand it, and if they have any questions, those questions are directed to the right person. So then that the strategies and what's being developed is discussed will then also spring off of that plan, but also the reporting of what's been done. I mean, the idea and ideal is that that if there have been particular initiatives or things undertaken, well, there will be reports compiled, financial reports, reports on marketing, results, effects of our, where we stand in terms of our fundraising efforts, what have you, and that those updates will go out before a board meeting, and everybody will read them and be up to date. So getting into a cycle like that, it takes some real discipline, but I mean, it also cuts through a lot of the meeting time and the need to go back over all that stuff.
So the idea is, sorry, that they would get that information, read it ahead of time. If they had questions, they'd bring it to the meeting, and it's not each person reading through their board report and taking hours to do that. Yeah. Great.
Exactly. And if they have questions, I mean, they can always follow up a meeting by asking questions too, but the board meetings really need to be about that strategy we're looking at for the next period of time. Financial reporting, especially quarterly financial reporting, should all go out in reports and never discussed at a board meeting. And I know I'm considered radical for that, but it's really, it's not necessary, and way too much time is taken up in board meetings reviewing financials. When those reports can go out, questions can be directed to the treasurer, who we trust, and to the appropriate staff member. And again, if there are problems or real issues with finance, we call a special meeting to deal with that. Okay.
Nello, there was one up in the chat. I'm not sure if you see it or not, but there's a question from Darcy McLean regarding your thoughts on a board retreat.
Okay, let me see here. Yeah, because I haven't been looking at these. Is it a question about whether to have a board retreat?
I think just your thoughts on them in general is what Darcy was. He can chime in if he wants to clarify his question.
Oh, I
Sure.
see.
Thanks, Alex. Nello, I'm asking about a board retreat for the board to, due to COVID and etc. We just don't have the opportunity to physically meet. We are looking for a board retreat where my 12 board and myself can meet in person. Is it better to have those once a year, on a quarter? What's your thoughts on the having them held?
Yeah, I think, well, yeah, I just don't like to call them board retreats. I think that you build into your schedule a regular planning, a special planning meeting, because at least once a year you have to review and approve the budget. You have to get everybody together to make sure we're all on the same page with our plan for the year. And I think that is a really good time to not just review the plan for for the program and what's happening, but it's also it's a really good time to reaffirm our values, vision, mission, those elements that really define who we are, and make sure that everybody is still on board with that. And then either to use that opportunity to update our planning, our strategic plan, or to develop that plan. And so there should be at least that opportunity once a year. And I think it should usually, in most cases, it should align sometime in the fourth quarter of the year, when you're also doing business around reviewing and approving the program and the budget.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Nello.
Sure. Other questions?
I saw Melanie from Shakespeare, Saskatchewan had her hand up. I don't know if she still has a question or not.
Oh, I always have questions. Hi there, everyone.
Hi.
Nello, you just said quarterly financials. I'd just be curious, in the 1 minute, we do monthly financials here, and we're a seasonal company, and it's always like, what the heck am I even reporting on? So I'm just curious what like a norm is, if that's something we go away from. Just a little bit of an expansion on thoughts there. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I think when possible to move to a quarterly report, because unless there's a reason to be on a monthly basis, it is a lot of extra work. It's a lot of extra time. I think also one reason why, financial reports invite, are also an open invitation to question things we decided a long time ago. And I think that's one of those things that bogs down and creates a lot of conflict where we don't need conflict. So I think, the earliest possible time to go to a quarterly reporting system is more efficient. It just, in general, you'll find that you'll have a much better sense of controls anyway at that point, because you have a better sense of perspective. It doesn't take very long at all to understand the cycles of a year, and especially how your fundraising relates to that. all those different cycles become more meaningful when you go to a quarterly reporting system.
Great. Another question is your thoughts on whether a 3-year or 5-year strategic plan for the board, which one's more effective? That's from
Boy, good. Boy, I love that question. I'm glad you asked that. I meant to mention it. 3 years. Anything beyond 3 years is fantasy land. And of course, what will happen is that if you're involved in a capital project or a major project of some sort, certain funding entities will demand 5 years, and so you give them 5 years. They know, you know, everybody knows that there are a couple of years that are rather fictional. But you know, the idea of this is that you're playing out. I mean, you're extrapolating a plan and a basis of a plan that says that we can do this. But I think realistically speaking, as far as strategy, a 2 or 3 year plan makes a lot more sense. The most valuable year in a plan is year 1. You know, it's the year that you're going into. It's the year that you have the targets, you know what you have to do, what you have to achieve. And you know that this is the year where you're laying groundwork for your long-term ambitions. So your year 1, year 2, year 3, those are realistic. I think that's also, if you can do a 3-year plan, which is really good, I think that has generated the most effective board, I think, response. You know, because they really have a sense of where we're going. It's not too far out in the future that they can't see it. You know, 3 years. Anybody else? Okay. I'm sorry, I was not looking at the chat because I had that, the slides up so much, and I was,
That's what my gig is. That's what I get to do. So I think we caught the questions.
Okay.
And we're right on the money time-wise. I don't know if there are any final questions. But I just want to take a moment to thank you so much, Nell. This has been such an enlightening and specific, really to the point. I appreciate your approach to this of making things very clear and helpful. I saw a lot of nodding heads throughout the presentation. So that I'm very grateful for. I'm looking forward very much so to our next session, which is coming up. You can put it in your calendar. It's April 6th, Wednesday, April 6th. They're all Wednesdays early in the month, 1 to 3 p.m. So Wednesday, April 6th will be our next one. And it'll be on fundraising and relational fundraising and development. So picking up on something we discussed today, but in more depth. So thank you so much, Nello, and everyone else who joined us today. I'll give you the last words, Nello, but I just want to let everybody know you can expect Carmel in the coming days to be sending out the recording along with the PDF of these slides and the schedule for the next webinars.
Great, thank you, Alex. I really appreciate all the support that you folks are giving is tremendous. I really appreciate it, Carmel, you as well. Thank you all. It's again, I so wish that we could be there in person, and I'm so looking forward to that, and because I know it's going to happen, and so I'm really looking forward to that time. So I'll probably see you again, maybe in person, for the Leading Arts Board or listening. I'm going to be doing the audiences. Yes, growing audiences, and that's a real fun workshop also. All right, so thank you all, and stay well, and we'll be in touch.